In northern Italy, risotto alla zucca is a common winter dish, and it can be made with a variety of pumpkins or winter squashes. A popular choice in the States would be butternut squash, or if you can find honeynut squash, it will make for an even sweeter and more flavorful risotto. First, I'm making a quick vegetable broth by adding a teaspoon of olive oil to a medium-sized saucepan on medium heat. Then add half an onion, a couple carrots, and a couple stalks of celery cut into large chunks, and 2 garlic cloves along with some sage leaves. Stir that around in the oil before filling the pot with 8 cups of cold water, and add a teaspoon of salt. Then just let it simmer on low heat until we're ready to use it. You can also use store-bought broth or even hot salted water, but this will make for the best results. Remove the ends from the squash and start peeling it before cutting it in half where the fat and skinny sides meet. Then slice the bottom end down the middle and remove all the seeds with a spoon. Here I use 2 honeynut squashes, but if you're using butternut, you'll only need 1. Cut the side that had the seeds into a few large chunks, and then with the side without the seeds, cut off the rounded parts to make it more square-like, and also cut the rounded sides into a couple large chunks. Start slicing the square into planks about 3/4 of an inch thick, and cut each plank into large cubes, also close to an inch in size. On a large baking sheet, add the squash and coat it generously with olive oil. Here I arrange the large pieces around the perimeter of the sheet because the sides will get hotter than the middle. But you're better off using 2 separate baking sheets because my squares got a little softer than I would have liked. Place the squash in a 430-degree oven for about 12 minutes or until you can easily put a sharp knife through the large pieces. Those will be used to make a puree, and the cubes will get mixed into the risotto for texture. While the squash cooks, finely mince a little less than half a yellow onion, which you should have left over if you made the broth from scratch. Once the squash is ready, remove the larger pieces to a plate and season the cubes with a pinch of salt and reserve them for later. Add all the large pieces to a tall glass or vessel you can use an immersion blender with, and blend them together with about 3/4 cup of the broth until you get a smooth puree. Make sure you put the broth through a strainer so you don't get any pieces of vegetable in there. You can also use a regular blender for this or even a potato masher, but it won't be quite as smooth. Now in a large saute pan, ideally with high edges, add a cup of arborio rice or other short grain rice that's good for risotto. Toast it on medium-low heat without any oil for just a couple minutes or until it becomes fragrant and some grains start to just turn golden. This will help seal each grain of rice and prevent it from becoming mushy during the cooking process. Then remove the rice and add a tablespoon of olive oil before dropping in the minced onion and giving that a stir with a pinch of salt. Let that cook on medium-low heat for about 5 minutes or until the onions become soft. Then add back the rice and coat that with the onion and oil, and you can also toss in a couple of sage leaves. At this point, turn the heat down to low before pouring in your first ladles of hot broth through the strainer. If you're using store-bought broth, it's still very important that you heat it up in a saucepan so it doesn't cool down the risotto and slow the cooking process when you add it. After that's reduced for about a minute and most of the liquid has been absorbed, add the squash puree and stir that in very well. You can also add a splash of broth to the glass with the puree to get all of the squash out and also pour that in. Now you're just going to continue cooking the risotto on low heat, stirring fairly often. Each time most of the liquid has been absorbed, you will add another few ladles of broth until the cooking process is complete. Every risotto will be different depending on what kind of rice you used, your pan, and the stove, so the amount of broth you need will vary. This is why it's very important to taste the rice for doneness as you get towards the end. While you're cooking the rice, you can also optionally fry a 1/4 cup of pine nuts in a tablespoon of butter on medium-low heat, and also throw in a few small sage leaves to top the risotto at the end. You want the rice to be al dente just like pasta. Not mushy at all, but not crunchy. This batch of risotto used close to 5 cups of liquid plus the puree before it was done about 25 minutes later. And the amount of liquid on the bag instructions said much less than that for 1 cup of rice, which is why you should use your own judgment instead. When it's close to done, the risotto should still be liquidy enough for you to toss it in the pan, especially because it will thicken after we add the final ingredients and it cools on the plate. Once al dente, take it off the heat and stir in half of the reserved roasted squash, along with a couple tablespoons of butter and then 1 large handful of grated Parmesan cheese, before giving the risotto another toss. In Italian cooking, stirring in the butter and cheese to make the dish creamier at the end is called mantecare, which is common in risotto and pasta dishes. Also, if you're able to toss the rice quickly in the pan, The grains will release their starch when they come in contact with each other, giving it an even better texture. To plate the risotto, add a good serving to the center of the dish, and then tap the bottom of the plate to disperse the rice evenly into a circle. Now sprinkle on some more Parmesan cheese along with the pine nuts and sage leaves. You can also add those in a circle to make it look nice. Finish with a few pieces of squash before enjoying.